So I've always, well, let's not say always. I have always been interested in politics to an extent. I've always loved critical thinking and engaging in conversations. Now, fortunately for me and my experience, I've already had the dose of like being able to converse with a lot of different cultures and backgrounds. I'm very mixed myself, military family, traveled quite a bit from normal standards, I guess. And obviously, when I grew up, I realized that there are certain routes I need to go in and things that I deem that are important, and politics is one of them. And once I gained engaged into politics, I realized, especially once I went to college, how toxic the current landscape is currently right now, how divided we are, how certain things that are in society as of right now with social media, with technology, with just the engagement between different factions of groups, I see that the way they engage is just not productive to overall discourse. So ultimately, I thought that we need to have someone who provides that nuanced perspective, who doesn't, automatically lean to left or right, who has an objective value or viewpoint, and is willing to engage in these conversations. And I enjoy this critical thinking. I enjoy conversations that gain and grow my knowledge and perspective. And I think that the message we're seeing on this podcast is very valuable to the people as a whole. So we started the show, and we've been going ever since.
Yeah, when did you start this bad boy up?
So it went through quite a few trials, I would say. We started, well, I started last year, I believe, sometime. And it originally wasn't what it is now. It was originally just like, hey, let's just comment about stuff. I have a lot of very interesting opinions. There's a guy who was supposed to be my like permanent co-host, like 50-50. But we just didn't see eye to eye with how everything was working. So I took full control of the podcast. I named it something before, and the title was just not good, so I changed the title eventually to Purple Political Podcast. And I was like, I don't want a podcast title with the name podcast in it, so eventually I changed it again to Purple Political Breakdown, rebranded, retooled, and then was able to coherently figure out, this is what we're doing, this is the message, this is the purpose of the podcast. And ever since I found that out, I was able to kind of go on a very clear path for the podcast.
So it took some time. It took you a couple of reruns and rewrites and just a little bit of time to get the right groove and the right people. You got two co-hosts on here right now, correct?
Yeah, as of right now, I have two co-hosts. They've been on for with me for about maybe a month and some change, maybe two
Okay.
months potentially. I did most of the episodes with the new rebranded style individually, and it was going well. But I wanted to add a different element as I grew the podcast, and I thought the best way to do it is to really show that this is what I'm doing. I'm hearing different perspectives. I want to have someone who leans left, and I want to have someone who leans right on the show, engaging in conversation. Really shows that we
Mhm.
have a lot of different perspectives. You may hear something you like if you're a Republican. You may hear something you like if you're a Democrat. Um, but as they're going to listen to the podcast, they're going to realize that we are really engaging in important conversation, and we don't hate each other. We don't hate each other. We agree a lot, actually, and we just try to find common ground.
Well, that's pretty cool. It's cool not to have to hate or you can argue, you can have differing opinions, but at the end of the day, y'all can say, okay, that was cool, or it wasn't, or we're still friends, or at least you don't want to beat the crap out of each other, you know?
Exactly, exactly. People sometimes, it seems, especially the youth, they think if you're like a Democrat and you engage with a Republican, the idea may initially start that, oh man, that Republican is racist. Or if you're a Republican and you're engaging with a Democrat, you might think, oh, that Democrat's a pedophile. It's just weird over labels that are so extreme and doesn't
Yeah.
really encapsulate who the person is. And as my podcast shows, at the end of the day, these things are not the case. You can engage, have conversations, and even befriend someone who has a different political ideology. It's possible, and
Yeah.
it doesn't need to be as toxic as everybody makes it seem.
Sure. And I think what you guys are going towards too is like coming to a are you coming to a common ground a lot of times in your episodes, or is it just agree to disagree?
Some agree to disagree, but we reach common ground. The importance that people need to realize when it comes to our country, and which is like a staple of the country when it especially in its initial implementation, is that we valued compromise. So there's a certain level of give and take when it comes to these things. You will never be able to overall just get my way or the highway, right? Some people say, "Oh, let's just vote in all Democrats, all Republicans, and then get only our policies out." That's unrealistic, and also one way of thinking is never a good way of thinking when it comes to a government. So, bipartisanship and compromise is valuable, and at a lot of times on the show, even though principally when it comes to innate principles or innate values, you'll never really agree with someone. That's just an agree to disagree point. But when it comes to a
Mhm.
solution, there's always common ground to find. There's always compromise to find. You just don't need to be prideful and stubborn and refuse to take it just because, oh, I don't want to give away any ground because I'm too prideful. That doesn't really get anybody anywhere.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. That's something to look forward to. It is the Purple Political Breakdown. The man is Riddell Lewis. He just came on to Blind Knowledge, which is pretty damn cool. And I definitely invite you to check out his podcast, his video cast, and you can find him anywhere. Basically, the podcasts are Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, but not in your mom's basement, dude. Definitely on blindknowledge.com. So Riddell, before you started doing this podcast, did you ever do any kind of broadcasting or any kind of any kind of entertainment stuff before?
No, nothing really entertainment.
Just
Anything that
jumped right in, huh? That's cool. That's cool, man.
Yeah, I mean, I got familiar to an extent with social media already, to be fair, because, after I was done with the military, did a YouTube channel for fun to talk about one of my hobbies, which is anime, because anime is cool. And, I had a good familiarity in terms of content and content creation. I knew that if I kept on going the route I was gonna go, I knew that I could probably be pretty big, but I got pretty bored because I didn't want to talk about anime forever. So eventually I wanted to transition to something that more valuable. So that that's what ultimately became this podcast because it kind of aligned to who I am more. But no
Hmm.
real experience by any means.
What's up with that anime trend? Do you want to do a second show? Maybe we can jump that up if it's gonna go big, man. You can't let go of it so quickly. I mean, why'd you let it go so quick?
It's just for fun.
Yeah.
I'm not too motivated by like, oh man, if I know if I go down this route, and this is kind of the story of my life. I know if I go down certain routes, it's an automatic success. But I tend to be one of those individuals that I'm gonna do things the way I want to do it. I'm gonna do what I want to do, and if I
Fair.
fail, then I fail. So it is what it is.
Yeah, you make your own pathway. That's what's up. I'm a lot like that as well. I mean, that's why I started the blind knowledge thing, is because it took a chance. It was still taking a chance to see if this thing's gonna fly or sink. Right now we're floating, which is pretty good. But I was sick of this 9 to 5. I was sick of being told when to wake up, when to take a shit, when to go to sleep. Excuse my language. Just kind of not being able to be. So it's good to hear that you can do that. It's good to hear that you're able to get that voice out there. And it's good to hear that you can motivate others to do the same. Now, let me ask you this. How do you get folks out there that are listening to your pod, that are to watching your video cast? How do you get them engaged?
So there's definitely a nuance when it comes to content creation, especially podcasts. From what I've learned, you need to have a few things. Obviously, one is if you have to have a certain level of recognition. So certain people who are already like famous or already have clout, they're gonna find easy that people are gonna listen to them because they are who they are, right? So with a new podcast like mine, I don't have that level of clout or recognizability or recognition. So I'm gonna have to do things that I feel like people are going to listen to. Now, I do think that people want to listen to political debates, political discussions. I do think people want to hear solutions and a new way of approaching politics. I've seen people time and time and again comment or review saying my approach is like very refreshing. But trying to make it as entertaining as possible is very key to really get people, interested into what you're saying. Just a monotone
Sure.
spiel can only get you so far. So
Yep.
having segments, engaging debates, asking the tough questions, really trying to spice up the conversation, being authentic still, but also like making this enjoyable. That's what you have to do. You have to make this enjoyable.
A spoonful of sugar makes the medicine go down, right?
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah, no, and that's a good approach. I mean, Mr. Monotone can only get you so far, like you said. And I always find that a little entertainment helps to learn a little more. It doesn't make it so boring to learn. It just like it sticks to you a little easier.
Yeah.
And that's a good approach. And I think you guys got that down. You said you were in the military. What just out of curiosity, what made you go into the military as a young kid?
So going into the military was hand in hand with my political journey, so to speak. So when I was about to graduate high school, I could have gone a bunch of different routes. I already considered being a lawyer, but I also considered that I want to get into politics right from high school, because I think that I should do something important. So politics was obviously the way to go. So I came to a conclusion that going into the military will just help my recognition of being a politician. This man went to the military, and
Yeah,
I was
yeah, you
kind
need
of
those things on your record, right? On your kind of resume, right?
exactly, exactly, and I was kind of persuaded to thinking, being at a pretty ignorant 18-year-old, that the Marine Corps was the best way to go about that. So my plan of action was go to boot camp. I did. Be a reservist. Go to college. I did. Graduate college. Go to the officer program. Be a JAG lawyer, and then go into politics after that. So that was my plan. But you know, I wish someone told me, gave me a little bit more perspective, because I'm an 18-year-old. I was pretty ignorant, and not things are just not going to go like that. Well, especially when I realize I don't like the Marine Corps. Um, I'm not good for the military, and I'm not good for the military because I don't really like being told what to do constantly. And then college, obviously I
Mm.
excelled in college, but the I had major disagreements with like certain people in the military. And then in college, when I'm about to go back to law school, I was like thinking, especially after I learned more about politics, I didn't like how the politics game was, so I didn't want to do it the traditional route. So I decided to kind of change how I'm doing. I don't want to do things my own way, which is why this podcast started. And then I'm going to go into a different career, a different way, instead of going the lawyer route where I have to go back to school, because I kind of don't want to go back to school either.
Okay. All right. So it sounds like you got the plan and you're in the middle of the plan. The plan is rehashing itself and you're just kind of riding the ride. And you have this podcast here that can be a very valuable tool, both in the present and in the future. So, big ups to you, man.
Yeah, appreciate it. Yeah, so far so good for from what I've done, and I think you shouldn't obviously just make decisions based off of whims or wants. You always should plan things out and adjust based on new information. These decisions obviously are not easy, but as long as you have a plan of action and you stick to a plan, then you probably will be more successful that way, instead of just going with the flow. So I wouldn't say I'm going
Yeah.
with the flow
Yeah.
necessarily, but I am kind of doing things my way.
That's cool. That's cool. I can't wait to see where this goes and where you end up with this podcast, especially. I mean, I can think of a couple things just off the top of my head that can be done as far as live forums go. There's some really cool options out there. What kind of topics have you hit on thus far that you found to be really really good shows? One that the show shuts off and you're like, damn, that was good.
So I think we've had a lot of great conversations, especially since the co-hosts arrived and gave their perspectives. Some good conversations we've had. Actually, recently we did an immigration episode that was really good. That's posting later on. But
Nice.
like prior episodes, we had a whole abortion debate where we dove into the complexities of abortions from different perspective. We dove into affirmative action and its pros and cons for both the education and the workplace, and um, we went through that in a lot of different perspectives as well. And there's other things that basically any controversial issue you could think of, we kind of dove into it for a good extent. But if you want to really listen to an episode that's like extremely engaging in terms of the conversation and potentially hear a different perspective on the issue, the first thing that probably comes to mind is the abortion one, and then the role of the parents one, which I think is very valuable as we dove into ways the parents can, you know, um, not raise your child necessarily, but ways to kind of uh, grow your child, nurture your child, and techniques that you may not even consider. So I think those two episodes were very engaging.
No kidding. Okay. All right. So that's a good place to start. I'm just realizing I had a typo there. It's the Purple Political Breakdown is the name of the show. Let's get that one right. Purple. It's funny that you picked that color because purple is coming up a lot in society and in culture. I'm noticing we, as Blind Knowledge, use that culture a lot because it's a very neutral color. So, is that why you picked purple for the neutrality or what?
I mean, it's very simple for me. It's the mix of red and blue, Republican, Democrat
Oh,
makes purple.
that's that's so easy. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. That's simple stuff, and and sometimes simple is better than complicated. What kind of topics you think you guys are gonna be hitting on going forward?
To kind of shadow some potential topics moving forward, we got a conversation about unions. This is kind of a rehashed conversation because the first episode I completely messed up the audio, so it never got recorded. So we're
Ooh,
revisiting the conversation, and this time I won't make that mistake. Talking about unions in America and the value of unions. We plan to talk about climate change. We have a climate change scientist that's coming on the show, and we're going to talk about what is going on, the potential nuances behind that, because there's some people who think climate change don't exist. There's some people think that climate change is the end of the world, and I'm sure there's a nuanced middle ground that we're going to dive into that. We're going to dive into modern relationships in America. Not only do we dive into politics, but we also dive into cultural and social issues because they're also very important in developing a proper society. And the probably the most fun, I can't wait for this one. Not necessarily because I just want to listen to the conversation because my co-host and the guests, I'm very curious on how they will engage with each other. Because one guy wants to talk about the deep state, and I'm not big on conspiracy theories, but
okay, yeah.
he's gonna come on and talk about the deep state. My one of the co-hosts is a Democrat, and he hates all that stuff. So I'm very curious to see how the conversation goes. But that will be a very entertaining episode when that drops as well.
Well, that's cool. So that's some really good stuff to look forward to. There's a back catalog to obviously go through over on Purple Political Breakdown. You can get it on Apple, Spotify, Google, Amazon, and probably anywhere you got podcatchers, um, except Stitcher. Stitcher just went out of business. R.I.P. But other than that, yeah, check them out definitely on Apple, Spotify, and blindknowledge.com. Yeah, man, there's not much more to really get into on this one. This is pretty much cut and dry, black and white. If you even know what I'm saying, man, it's just the damn thing, and we just did it. So that's Riddell Lewis. If you want to just give any last words of thought before we break it down and make this an episode, go right ahead, man.
Yeah, so at the end of the day, some important things to consider is that the reason why this podcast exists, and something that you as an individual who are listening in needs to consider for yourself, is that there's a value in growing your perspective. There's a value in engaging in these conversations. You don't need to necessarily agree with the person. You don't need to align perfectly with them ideologically. You just need to be willing to listen. You just need to be willing to converse. And by growing your perspective, by having this conversation, by having these discussions, you'll be able to gain a newfound respect and perspective. And that's how solutions are made at the end of the day. And that's a big thing that we advocate for on this podcast.
Ladies and gentlemen, Riddell Lewis, he does host. He started up, he's the creator of the Purple Political Breakdown. Check him out over on blindknowledge.com. That's the end of this episode of the Blind Knowledge Spotlight. We will check y'all later. Have a good one and be safe out there.